Aloha and welcome to the part 3 of our underscore programming experience. We're continuing to use this 5 years of UH degree data because it's kind of fun to look at. And as before, this same structure. What we're going to do in this one is implement two more functions, one called list campus data degrees and one called max degrees. This is going to help you or allow you to experience a couple new functions from underscore called group by and map object. At least that's the way I solved it. I think there's a few different ways you could solve this one. Okay, so let's try doing this. So the first thing we got to do is start the timer. And then the second thing we got to do is create a fork of our previous practice WOD. So that we can, now we have a new URL that's going to refer to this particular data and our experience. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called list campus degrees data. It's going to be passed through each data and returns an object where the property keys are campuses and the values are the number of degrees awarded by the campus. And then this could be a little confusing, so I actually gave you some hints on what to look at. So the way I did it is to use the group by function, and let's look at that one. So the group by function is right here, and what that does is that takes a list, okay, and then it returns an object. So it starts with a list, but the value returned is an object, and the object return has basically has transformed this list into a set of groups or partitions based upon some key value. Okay, so in this case we're looking at the what is the truncated value of these things, and that becomes our key, and then the value is an array of all the objects that satisfy or that are part of that particular group. So that's kind of good, because what we want to do is we want to have the keys be the campuses, and then the values be the number of degrees awarded by the campus. So the first step in doing this is to get this object where the keys are campuses and the values are at least data associated with the campus. And we can do that by saying, let's call it the campus object equal underscore dot group by data, and then the what we're going to use as our kind of organizational, our kind of grouping function is the value of the fiscal year field, because we have an object, we apply this to that data object, and I'm sorry, not fiscal year, campus, right? Because we're organizing this. Property keys are campuses. Okay, so if we look here, we've got campus. All right. So let's start off by grouping the data that's passed in by campus, and then let's just say return campus object, and let's play around with this to see what the result looks like. So if we take our if we invoke this and then we invoke it with our test data set, which had 5 elements in it, what you can see is we get an object back where the keys are our campuses, that's what we wanted, and then the values is an array with all of the entries associated with that campus. Okay, and then if we were to do this, for example, with UH data, what we find is we get a whole lot of records associated with each of the campuses. Okay, so we're on our way here. The problem is that we've got our property keys being campuses, but we want the values not to be the set, an array of all of the entries associated with this campus. We want the values to be the actual number of degrees awarded by the campus. Okay? Well, there's a simple way to do that, which, I'm giving you a hint so that you don't have to kind of scrounge around in this thing forever. It's called the map object, which is under objects. Okay? And what's cool here is it's like map but for objects. So it's going to iterate across all of the the elements, the key value pairs in an object, and then it's going to apply some function to the values and replace it. So here's a function that's going to basically increment by 5 each of these values. So you start with an object and you end with a new object where the values have been transformed. Well, that's exactly what we want. We want to transform the values currently associated, which is this array. We want to change that value into the number of degrees. Conveniently enough, we got a function that does that, total degrees. It takes an array of entries and returns the integer value. Okay, so it turns out that this is actually super easy. We can just say return underscore map object, where what we pass in is the campus object, and then we apply total degrees to the total degrees function to each of the values associated with this object, where each of those values are those arrays. So let's try this with our test data, see what happens. And lo and behold, looks perfect. Okay, so we do it one more time with with our full data set, and here we get the number of degrees associated with each campus. So that's pretty good. Okay, that's number one. Now let's look at this next one, max degrees. This function can be passed to UH data, computes the number of degrees earned in each year in the data set, and then returns an integer, which is the number of degrees earned in the year where the most degrees were earned. Okay, so in some sense, what we're going to do is we're going to almost build this same kind of object, but then we've got to return the number, which is the maximum value. So if instead of doing this by year, we were doing it by campus, then we'd want to return probably Manoa, right? Because that's going to have the most. Where are you, Manoa? There it is, 23,000 degrees. Okay? But we're not doing it, we're doing it by year. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same. And if you look at the example or the hints, you can say, whereas this one was the group by and map object, I say here, let's use group by map object kind of the same way to build that same thing, but then we'll use the values and max functions. So let's see how this works. Okay, again, this is one of those things you're going to have to kind of fool around a little bit. So function max degrees data. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is I think once again we want to group all this data set by year, because we're trying to find the number of degrees associated with the year in which the maximum number of degrees were awarded. So if we look back at our key, fiscal year is what we want in here. Okay, and then if we just, let's call this, I don't know, year object, just to make it a little different. Okay, and so then let's just return it. And then if we say console.log max degrees of test data. Okay, so what we get here is remember we had I guess we had, what, 10 elements in there? Yeah, the first 10. Those were all associated with 2010. And we have each of the objects in there. Okay, and so what we want to do next is we want to kind of boil that down to the actual number of degrees associated with that particular year. So how do we do that? Well, we can say something like let totals equals underscore dot map object, just kind of like we did before, right? Year object and total degrees. Okay, so now if we if we look at totals in our, let me do this, clear this to make this a little easier to see. Okay, so now what we've done is we boil it down for our test object, which only had data from 2010, we've got the year as the object and then the number of degrees. So if we look at UH data, okay, now we've got all 5 years and we've got the total number of degrees associated with that. So we're almost there. The problem is that we can, by inspection, we can say that 2014 and this 11,278, that's the value we want this function to return. So the question is, how do we go from this object to just this data value? And I think what I recommend here is that you look at the values and the max functions. So let's just follow our own advice. Values returns all of the values of the object's own property. So if we have 1, 2, 3, then we return an array 1, 2, 3. Okay, that looks promising. Let's just try doing that. Let's return underscore dot values of totals, and let's see what that gives us. Okay, well that gives us an array of all the values. All right, well that's good. Let's go back here, and then the final thing is to say, well, max. Well, that definitely sounds, like what we want, which says given a list, returns the maximum value in it, and then these other things are optional. Okay, so looks to me like we could say, for example, underscore max of underscore values total. And with any luck, bam, there we go. We've just written our max degrees function. Okay, we'll call that, let's just see, is there anything else we have to do? I think we have to press update. So we'll slide right on in at about 12 minutes for these two functions. Pretty cool. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.